In today's show, some teams in the Western Conference spent this summer actively doing nothing, or maybe even getting a little bit worse. What does that mean for your Portland Trail Blazers? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, by way of a mini preview, I want to talk about teams in the Western Conference that got worse, and specifically teams that are likely to be at the bottom of the standings, on the edge of the play-in or below it, that maybe didn't improve or got a little bit worse, and how that impacts the Trailblazers. We'll talk about kind of the bottom half of the Western Conference, bottom third, bottom 40%. It's probably more accurate what we're going to talk about today of the Western Conference. This was inspired by something I mentioned in passing on yesterday's episode. If you will, if you're an everydayer, you'll recall that I mentioned in passing that a friend had told me that he believed that if the Blazers really went for it, they could make the playoffs. This is someone familiar to the basketball podcasting, the Portland basketball podcasting universe. Shout out to Basketball Gabe. Basketball Gabe has clarified those remarks to say that his stance was that if the Blazers tried, if they were intent on being competitive through a full 82 game schedule, that they could make the play-in. I said playoffs, top 8. I misrepresented Basketball Gabe. I apologize, Basketball Gabe. You're still a real one, but even the play-in would require quite a leap. In fact, I have said this many times to folks who have posed this belief, because I don't think the Blazers can make the play-in. But my opinion is not necessarily going to be what shows up today. I want to work out this thought experiment with sort of the reality of the league, as opposed to like what Mike believes, because you get a pretty heavy dose of what Mike believes. But what I have posed when people have said this to me, I think they can make the play-in. Which 5 teams are they going to be better than to finish 10th? Because that's what it would take, right? The Blazers were the worst team in the Western Conference. So what they finished 15th in a 15-team conference. What 5 teams are they going to jump, leapfrog, in order to finish 10th, right? Like who is going to fall such that the Blazers can finish 10th and make the play-in? Not much, and 10th means you're on the road and you got to win 2, and like 10th is unlikely to make the playoffs, because it's winning a couple road games, certainly possible, winning a couple road games. But 10th would be the threshold that Basketball Gabe set. So if they tried to be competitive, if they went for it over the course of 82 games, they could get there. And I think folks probably typically list off the usual suspects. And when I posed this to Basketball Gabe yesterday, started looking at the standings. All right, who could it be? So what I want to do in today's episode is kind of tease out that logic. Look at the teams that are projected to be in the bottom of the West and what they did this summer, and whether they got better or they got worse, or they stayed the same and they're likely to be bad, and what that means, and then what it means for the Trailblazers. So let's walk through the logic. Let's walk through the bottom of the West and talk about what it might mean for the Trailblazers. For a moment, like setting aside my own skepticism for this. To do this, I used the over-under win totals currently on FanDuel. The Blazers, they've bumped up from their early projection of 21.5 wins to 22.5 wins. Still the lowest projected over-under line of any team in the West for FanDuel. Next is Utah at 29.5, followed by San Antonio at 36.5. The Clippers are the 12th lowest over-under preseason line on FanDuel, 38.5. The Lakers, Rockets, and Warriors are all right there, tied with the 11th lowest over-under win total at 43.5. But let's start with like the logic of what 5 teams is like. It's got to be some of those, right? But I want to say this: there is some team that's going to have a season not dissimilar to what Memphis had a year ago. Memphis, according to FanDuel, is up there and like pushing 50 wins this season, 47 and some change, I believe, or 49 and a half. According to my handy dandy notes here, like Memphis is likely to be good again. If John Morant's back and Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bane, and they're available, they're going to be a competitive team yet again, which adds to the complications for the Blazers being good. I think there's a bunch of good teams. Like I think Denver got worse, right? Like losing KCP and not making any major additions, and then losing Deron Holmes to an Achilles injury. So they like their rookie, first round rookie who was going to be probably like had a real role. Like I think Denver got worse, but they're too good to be in this conversation, right? Like I think that's true. I think you could. Minnesota is probably not appreciably worse, but they lost some depth that could help them, but they're way away from this conversation, right? Like, but I think these teams at the bottom that I just mentioned are in there. But there's some team that could surprise Memphis style. After those six that I listed to you, that are the six lowest odds of, or six lowest over underlines of anyone in the West, Sacramento and New Orleans their over-under line is set at 46.5, and I think either of those teams are like some bad injury luck away from being like a bad team out of the playoff picture and like in the low play-in or below, right? I want to operate here assuming that every team gets reasonable health. And by that, I mean, like, if you say, well, every team's going to get injuries, but let's just like work under the assumption here, because like somebody's going to have bad injury luck, like Memphis a season ago, and it's really going to go south. Some team's going to drop, right? There's some team that drops. How far they drop is probably, dependent on the rest of their depth, but some team is going to have some bad luck and they're going to be out of the picture. That's just the nature of it, right? But let's assume some reasonable health. So something like, if you think like, okay, Anthony Simons and Jeremy Grant will be available for 70% of the Blazer games, just assume that when we talk about these teams, their stars will also be available for about 70% of their games, right? So we're assuming relative and reasonable health. I think at the bottom here, Utah and San Antonio, I think they are teams that the Blazers could conceivably leapfrog. Utah didn't do anything. They're ostensibly running it back. They made some trades at the end of last season to get a little bit younger and get some, Kelly Olynyk departs, etc. And they lost Chris Dunn to the Clippers in a sign and trade. I don't think Chris Dunn is the thing that changes things. They're largely running it back, but I think important for and they're going to keep Lauri Markkanen, and that's a big part of the Utah calculation, is that based on when he signed his contract, he's on the team for the rest of the season. But they could be a team that makes other trades. Walker Kessler and John Collins could be traded. Like they could get actively worse during the season. And when you're kind of in the position they're in, like they're going to start Keontae George at point guard. They're going to be young. I think Taylor Hendricks is going to play a bunch for the Jazz this year. Like they're going to be young. They're a team that could take a step back, and because of kind of where they are relative to where they were to begin last season, and the likelihood that they make some trades that prioritize future assets or maybe youth as opposed to like improving the immediate term of the Jazz. So like they're a team that could take a step back. I think the Jazz sort of like relative inaction, quiet off season speaks to a team that is not actively pursuing wins, although they're like, when you have someone as good as Lauri Markkanen, you're going to be competitive, but I think their line at 29.5 is pretty reasonable. I think they're like I think if everything breaks right for the Jazz, they win 35 games, 36 games. But I think they're also fairly likely to win 26 games. San Antonio improved, right? Adding Harrison Barnes, adding Chris Paul, Victor Wembanyama in year 2, like they're going to be better. They're going to be better. The question is, how much? How much better? How much better? Like I think Chris Paul is, to me, he's one of the 5 greatest point guards that ever played in the NBA. I think he's an all-timer. He's kind of an annoying fellow, maybe a challenging coworker, but like I think he's an all-timer. But he's older, right? And he's clearly not what he was, even back in 2021 or 2022. Like he clearly looks slower and less explosive and less able to get to spots. And the secret of Chris Paul is he's one of the great mid-range shooters to ever play the game, and he could always get to a spot. And 6 feet tall, but could always get where he wanted to go. He's not quite that anymore. He's taking a step back, but he'll help. Just organization-wise, like getting everybody organized. Harrison Barnes is a pro. He has some flaws, obviously, but he's a pro. He's an NBA starter. He'll be helpful there. I'm a Devin Vassell believer, but even then, all that said, like, how much better do we think the Spurs are going to be? Better. Their line on FanDuel's 36.5. I think that's fair. I think that they have a chance to be a winning team. They have a chance to win 42 games, and push up the standings. But I think they have an equal chance to be, again, one of the 3 worst teams in the West. I think it's very, very reasonable that they are, and they're in the mix. They're in the Utah and San Antonio down in the mud. That means the Blazers could conceivably leapfrog them, right? Because I don't think either of those teams, if you assume reasonable health, I don't think either of those teams are. I think both those teams are better roster-wise than the Blazers. I think that's, to me, non-controversial opinion, but to you, maybe very controversial. That's the beauty of it. But I think both of those teams are better roster-wise than the Blazers. But Utah, not like significantly. I think Lauri Markkanen's a lot better than the Blazers' best player, and Wemby's ceiling is so high that it's hard to know exactly where the Spurs might be. But I think their roster is better than the Blazers. Both those teams are better, but right in the mix. The other teams are probably a little further away, but some of them not so much, and particularly the teams in LA. Let's talk about those teams in Los Angeles, because they're older, and I don't think one of them got worse, and I don't think the other one made any significant improvements. Let's talk about that, plus Golden State and Houston in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you about Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks puts members first, so your withdrawals are fast, they're safe and secure. When you win, when your picks hit, you can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. Prize Picks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Plus, Prize Picks is the best way to get on the action. It's available in most states, including Oregon and also California, Texas, and Georgia if you're from one of those more populated states. But my listeners in Oregon, you can get in on the action on Prize Picks. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's show is also brought to you by Gametime, the place for last-minute tickets and the app that rewards you for procrastinating. If you want to go see live sports, live comedy, a concert, or maybe even live theater, Gametime is the spot to go for last-minute tickets because you're going to get discounts on events up to the day of, the hour of. And if you're looking for sporting events, you can even get deals after that thing starts. What I like about Prize Picks, super clean, super easy to use app. Pull up what you're looking for. You see the venue right there on your phone. I like to toggle in all-in pricing, so what you see is what you get. Whatever that number you see on the screen, hovering over your seat, you click on that number, you go to checkout, that's exactly what you pay. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. All you got to do is download the app, create an account, and use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, super simple one. Create an account. Use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right. Let's talk about the bottom of the West some more. Those teams in California got worse. The Lakers got worse probably just because of age. They didn't really do anything this summer. Like they basically hung around. Dorian Prince left. They added Dalton Connect, who might be an interesting and useful rookie. They got a new coach in JJ Redick, who might maybe an upgrade over Darvin Ham, but like a total unknown. We have no idea what JJ Redick's going to be. They had a Bronny James, but I can't imagine that matters. They just signed Christian Coloco, but I can't imagine that matters. Largely what they did was nothing. They didn't do anything. They did nothing. They just chilled and they did nothing. They might have the best duo in the NBA, like at the height of their powers, playing at their absolute best. There might not be a better duo than Anthony Davis and LeBron James. But LeBron James turns 40 pretty soon. And Anthony Davis has had issues with consistency, both in production and just staying on the court. Like, those dudes are older and have had some health concerns. That's a real part of the Lakers situation. When healthy, I think they can compete with literally any team in the league. When healthy, carries a lot of weight, and asking LeBron to do what he does for 82 games and get you into the playoffs at some point, like, LeBron is the best basketball player I've ever seen. I don't remember Michael Jordan with hair, and I wasn't old enough to like truly appreciate the greatness in context. I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I certainly appreciated the greatness of Jordan, but not like I could when I was a little bit older watching LeBron. He's the best player I've ever seen. But also he came into the league in 2003. Like, he is still probably one of the 10 best players in the NBA, but there is a limit to what he can do at his age every night, right? Like, his peak is still outrageous, but what he can do every night during the regular season and carry a team has changed. The Lakers are likely to be worse than they were last season just by virtue of LeBron James and Anthony Davis are older and they didn't upgrade the rest of the roster. How much worse, I think, is a question. I feel like the sort of inverse of the Spurs. How much better are the Spurs? I don't know. A little bit, right? Maybe a lot of bit. How much worse are the Lakers? A little bit, and maybe a lot of bit, right? Like, they could. I think the floor for the Lakers has really lowered this year. The ceiling is about the same, right? Like, this could be the 5th best team in the West if it hits. But like, this could be a team that misses the play-in altogether. I think that is a very real scenario for the Lakers this year because they just didn't do anything. They didn't upgrade the roster in any meaningful way, unless you're like a big Dalton Connect believer. And if you are, good on you. Rocky Top, or I don't know. Northern Colorado, is that where he came from before? I don't know what they do at Northern Colorado. I know they got some UNC stolen valor on the bottom line sometimes. Like the scroll line on the scoreboard. I see UNC, I'm like, that ain't us. The Clippers are worse. The two teams in LA, it's like the Clippers we're going to get, they're older too. Like, if your stars are in the wrong side of 33, it just is what it is. But the Clippers lost Paul George in free agency. He just left. He left. They played it wrong, and he left. Whether you want to give Paul George $200 million is maybe another question, but like, they could have given him something less than that, a shorter term version of the deal that he got in Philly, and probably kept him on the team and kept their, I don't know, championship window, but like good ass team window open. And they didn't. They won 51 games last year. They're worse. And then Lawrence Frank, I believe it was on Tuesday, September 24th. You're listening to Thursday, September 26th show. But this week, Lawrence Frank addressed the media, and part of that address was to clarify that Kawhi Leonard got some sort of procedure on his knee performed this summer. Kawhi, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but you may recall that he was on the Olympic team, and then he wasn't. They sent him home. They say, the USA Basketball determined that he just wasn't healthy enough to compete. He leaves the team. They add Derek White. Jaylen Brown gets mad. And then he apparently had, according to Lawrence Frank, the president of basketball operations for the Clippers, apparently had a knee procedure, and his swelling is getting a little bit better, but he is going to be, quote, held out of drills to start camp, and the Clippers are optimistic about Kawhi having a great season. I bet they are. What else are you supposed to say what else are you supposed to say at your media day press conference than you're optimistic about Kawhi Leonard? We're freaking devastated. We're doomed. I can't believe it. This is happening again. Oh my gosh. Like, of course they're optimistic, but that doesn't sound good for all the trouble that Kawhi's had staying healthy and what he looked like, reportedly, I guess what he looked like in USA practice. Get sent home from the USA team. Like, they opt out to bring you to the Olympics because they don't think you're healthy. And then you have knee surgery, and then you're not going to be a full go. And when camp opens, that's not great for someone with his track record. The Clippers are worse. No Paul George and an injured Kawhi. They're worse. They're over under 38.5. They're one of 4 teams in the West with an over-under line set as a losing record. The Blazers, Utah, the Blazers, the Jazz, the Spurs, and the Clippers. The Clippers have a low floor. James Harden's pretty good. He's annoying, but and I don't think he's good enough to be the A1 on a good team anymore. But he has some moments where you remember that he was what peak James Harden looked like. He just doesn't have enough moments to carry a team for long stretches if he needs to, and it sounds like he might need to. Clippers might be competitive. They might be plucky, but they're worse than they were a season ago. Let's talk Houston and Golden State to close the show. I think they're maybe a cut above these teams because of their upside, but their floor is still right down with the rest of this group. And we'll talk about what this all means for the Trailblazers. Join me in that third segment, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and you know about it. And right now, it's NFL season. We're heading into week 4. Tonight, as you're listening to this, you get Thursday night football. So you can sit down and watch your Thursday night game. You can watch Go Big Blue, the Giants play, the G-Men play, the Cowboys. And if you're watching the game and you got a hunch in the middle of the game, you can pull up the FanDuel app. You can check the latest stats. You can check live play-by-play on the same screen where you place your bet. So you can be an informed and up-to-date follower of the game, like, all the stats you need and everything you need to know. Second screen as you're watching TV, and then you can make live bets on the game right there. And if you're a new user to FanDuel, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And it doesn't have to be during Thursday Night Football. It can be all weekend long as the NFL rolls forward. So why not check out America's #1 sportsbook over at FanDuel.com. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. We've talked Utah, San Antonio, and both the teams in LA. There's 2 other teams that in the West that, did they get worse? I don't think Houston got worse. I don't think they're in this category, but I'll mention them because I think their floor is relatively low. I think their ceiling is also relatively low. I think they have a narrow range of where they're going to be. I think they're going to be on the edge of the play-in. They might get in. They might get out. They've got enough young players that can take steps forward that they might be really good, but how good is their top end talent? I'm a big Alperen Şengün guy. I think he's really good. I think he's really talented, and I was really impressed last year that the Rockets were able to play Şengün as much as they did and be a good defensive team. I'm a believer, but what is their ceiling with their top end talent? But they got enough young, interesting players and enough the depth that they could be in the mix, right? This team could finish 8th in the West. I don't think that's out of the question. They could also finish 12th because, again, what's their top end talent look like? How does it all fit together? It seems like they have too many players for everyone to get on the court. If everyone's not getting on the court, how are the vibes? They're certainly a team that has a wide array. I just said that, a narrow array. They have, their ceiling is low enough that the floor could come into play, is what I'm trying to say here. Also, I think another thing worth watching with Houston is they have enough trade assets to be a team that adds a star. If someone gets upset during the regular season, the Houston is going to be a team that goes star hunting. I think it's very clear from all the reporting coming out of Houston that that's the plan. Go get a top-tier star. They have so many young players, and they've kind of ironed out their pick situation now with various trades with Brooklyn that they're going to be in play. They're going to be in play for being a competitive team. They're not a team that got worse. Nothing about them got worse. Golden State, did they get worse? I don't think so, but maybe. It's certainly possible. You lose Klay Thompson, franchise icon, but you replace him with some depth. Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, friend of the pod, just a player I like. He has some limitations, but I like him. I like his style. He can't shoot, and he moves so slow, and he's such a good passer and cerebral defender, but he's so slow-footed. And DeAnthony Melton. You had some depth, Hield, Melton, and Anderson, and lose Klay Thompson. I would probably argue, and this could be a hot take. This might be a real hot take, so maybe I saved it for later in the show. The Warriors might be better than they were last season. They might have improved, but they didn't take a big step forward, and they were a team that lost in the play-in and missed the playoffs. I think they're at the same level again, right? I think they're at the same level. I think Houston and Golden State are pretty unlikely to bottom out, but they could. Obviously, Golden State's top heavy. They're very dependent on Steph Curry. It's a pretty good guy to be very dependent on, but they're really top heavy, right? And if Steph were to miss some time, we're assuming pretty good health, but say Steph plays 70% of the games, the 30% of the games, how do they score? Jonathan Kuminga and Buddy Hield, how do they score enough points to be good on that end, and not like very stinky. I think their depth will help them more than just like the presence of Klay Thompson, but certainly it'll be a change. Those are 6 teams in the West. I think Utah's a little bit worse, but about the same. But they're not very good. San Antonio is a little bit better, but not very good. The Lakers are probably worse. The Clippers are probably worse. Golden State is a neutral, but I think they got mildly better. And Houston is a neutral, but they have a path to being a little bit better. If you think about those 6 teams, to reach Basketball Gabe's plan of the Blazers making the play-in, they got to leapfrog 5 of them. Here's why I'm skeptical. That's 5 freaking teams. Could the Blazers finish above some of these teams? Absolutely. They could finish above Utah. There's a world in which they finish above San Antonio. It's a world where they finish above the Clippers. I have a hard time picking them to finish above the Lakers and Houston and Golden State, but certainly I think it's not totally out of the question if everything breaks right for the Blazers and Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson hit their strides. I did a show a couple weeks back, was like, what would it look like if the Blazers were competitive? And it's like, okay, the Blazers hit that. They hit all their like 99% outcomes, and some of these teams hit their like, bottom 5% outcomes. Yeah, there's a world where all of this clicks, right? And the Blazers are, move up a bunch of spots. But here's the actual reality. If this is in danger of happening, the Blazers are going to pull the plug. We've seen them to be shameless losers. And, they didn't like make aggressive moves to get worse and cheaper this offseason, right? They held on to some vets that are going to help them be competitive, as Basketball Gabe mentioned. But, or to me, he didn't mention it to y'all on the program. It's like they have some NBA players on the roster. They're missing some top end talent, high end starters, but they got NBA vets on the roster for sure, to be certain. So some of this is just like the reality is that if the Blazers are in contention of this, we've just seen what the franchise is willing to do, is that they're willing to make up injuries whole cloth and pull guys out of games and lose, 20 of their final 22 games and ensure that they very specifically don't make the play-in. And while that kind of sucks, I think tanking is a scourge and it's awful. It's also the pragmatic thing to do. The Blazers finishing 10th and and getting the 9th pick in the draft or something, or whatever it would be, like the 7th pick in the draft, that might just prolong their time in the gutter. Unfortunately, the league incentivizes losing to an extent where being one of the 5 worst teams and specifically one of the 4 worst teams in the league has real value. 3 worst teams in the league has real value. It's like, this is the path. You have to lose. If you're in a position like the Blazers, this is like the pragmatic way to go about this, is to lose. It's the right thing to do. It's pretty brutal on fans. Like, it's pretty brutal going into the season knowing that it's better if your team is less competitive. I think that is a really stinky place to put fans. But it's probably the most responsible thing the organization can do considering the position they're in. So while I probably disagree with the premise of Basketball Gabe set up front, is that the Blazers, if they were competitive for 82 games, that they could be a play-in team. I just disagree with that outright, talent-wise. The premise is a faulty to begin with, because the Blazers won't be competitive for 82 games. And I think this was kind of the origin of the frustration in this conversation with Gabe, who's a big fan. It's like, he wants to go into a season being able to root for a team that's going to go for it. And knowing maybe they might stink, but not a tanking season. Not a season where okay, well, when you get to the second half of February after the All-Star break, this team that I love is going to try to lose games and I will have to be on board with it again. And I understand that frustration. That stinks. I also I understand that you can believe both things, and I think I believe this. It stinks. It's a scourge. It's awful for the league, and it's also the pragmatic approach for the Trailblazers. It's what they need. It's what they need to do. Unfortunately, it's what they have to do, considering their position. But if you look at the bottom of the West, there are some teams that got worse. There are some teams that are going to be down towards the bottom, and I think the question is, how far do these teams fall towards the bottom, and how much does their sinking influence what the Blazers do? Because we know what the Blazers' goal is. and it ain't winning. And so if Utah and San Antonio and the Clippers sink, how do the Blazers respond? I think that's something we'll be watching all year long, is like, what does the rest, not to mention the East, right, where I think like Brooklyn and Washington are really going to go for it. They are going to go for it. So the Blazers will certainly be watching those teams as well. Not to mention some other teams in the East, but I think specifically Brooklyn and Washington are going to really go for it. And so that'll be something to monitor in the Blazers' pursuit. And this year, reportedly, is just like the 2025 draft class, even outside of Cooper Flagg, is excellent. And it's like, this is a year to be down. This is a year to be down. So that's who got worse. That's how the Blazers can leapfrog them. But in the end, as I leave you here, they don't want to leapfrog them, and I believe in this franchise's ability to not leapfrog too many teams. I think the Blazers are going to finish with a bottom 5 record come hell or high water, and if they have to break the dam to bring the high water or invite the devil in to have hell, they will find it one way or another. That's going to do it for today's show. Tomorrow's show, season preview for Scoot Henderson. Don't miss it. It's going to be a fun one. You will enjoy it. Available wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube, free on all your platforms. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.